Fundamental movement skills are the building blocks of movement. They are a specific set of gross motor movements that involve different body parts, such as the feet, legs, trunk, hands, arms and head, and are essential for children's participation in sport and physical activity throughout life. As children do not naturally learn these skills as part of their normal growth and development, fundamental movement skills need to be taught. And it is important for educators to provide direction and feedback to children. While mastery of the fundamental movement skills may not be accomplished by some children until they reach primary school age, it is essential to provide the opportunity to explore and practice these skills in the early childhood years, whilst keeping them fun. Feedback and guidance will also help to ensure that children develop skills correctly. Children develop individually and at different rates. It is more important to understand skill development as sequential, focusing on children progressing through different stages rather than being proficient by a particular age. Fundamental movement skills are categorized into three groups: stability skills, locomotor skills, and manipulative skills. Stability skills are movements where the body remains in place but moves around its horizontal and vertical axis. Locomotor skills are movements where the body moves from one place to another. Manipulative skills are those which involve giving or receiving force to or from an object. This resource will focus on the locomotor and manipulative skills. Educators need to be familiar with the correct technique for each fundamental movement skill, so that they can identify errors and demonstrate the correct way to perform a skill. Educators should provide children with lots of direction and positive encouragement to help them become more proficient and confident in performing fundamental skills. Safety should be considered when planning all physical activity, especially to ensure that children do not collide or otherwise injure themselves or other children. Children's clothing and footwear should be appropriate to support physical activity. Some safety guidelines should also be followed, and children should be regularly encouraged to drink water and stay hydrated. The National Quality Framework recognises the importance of fundamental movement skills, highlighting the significance of physical activity in the Early Years Learning Framework Learning Outcome 3. Children have a strong sense of well-being, especially when children take increasing responsibility for their own health and physical well-being. Physical activity is also a focus in the National Quality Standard Quality Area 2. Children's health and safety, with physical activity being addressed in Element 2.2.2, physical activity is promoted through planned and spontaneous experiences and is appropriate for each child. Each of the fundamental movement skills consists of a specific set of components. There are a number of common errors that children may make as they practice their fundamental movement skills. Some of these common errors will be identified for each skill, as well as ways that educators can help children to correct their technique. These corrections are often as simple as providing a verbal cue to children to help them understand how to correctly perform a skill, and demonstrating the correct technique so that children can replicate the educator's movement. Stability skills are movements where the body remains in place but moves around its horizontal and vertical axis. For example, balancing, stretching, bending and twisting. These skills are needed in order to progress onto locomotor and manipulative skills. Balancing in particular is important. Balance is when there is an even distribution of weight on each side of a vertical axis. Static balance is where a child is balanced while stationary, and dynamic balance is where balance is maintained while moving. Static balance develops before dynamic balance. Children can be encouraged to hold their arms out to maintain balance, and can practice balancing by moving along balance beams or similar equipment through obstacle courses, moving whilst balancing a beanbag on different parts of their body, or through dance and yoga. Running is a rapid movement that involves transferring weight from one foot to the other, where both feet briefly come off the ground. The arms move in opposition to the legs, with the elbows bent. There is a brief period where both feet are off the ground. The child has a narrow foot placement, landing on the heel or the toes, not flat-footed. The non-support leg is bent about 90 degrees, so that the foot is close to the buttocks. Some common errors that children experience with running include running flat-footed, running with stiff arms, and looking down at the ground. Some corrections and verbal cues to address these common errors could include instructing children to try and land on the balls of their feet, bend their arms, and to look ahead instead of looking at the ground. Jumping is the action of pushing off with both feet and landing with both feet. Prior to takeoff, both knees are bent and arms are extended behind the back. The arms extend forcefully forward and upward, reaching above the head. Both feet come off the ground together and land together. Both arms are forced downward during landing. Some common errors that children experience with jumping include not taking off and landing on both feet, and limited arm movement before, during, and after the jump. Some corrections and verbal cues to address these common errors could include instructing children to take off and land on 2 feet, and asking children to swing their arms back before the jump, to reach for the stars, to encourage arm extension during the jump, and to swing their arms back on landing. Galloping is stepping off one foot, then sliding with the other foot in a forward direction. Weight is transferred from the front foot to the back foot with a small lift before the front foot takes the next step. The stepping foot is always the front foot. The arms are bent and swing forward. The child takes a step forward with the lead foot, followed with the trailing foot landing beside or a little behind the lead foot, not in front of the lead foot. There is a brief period where both feet come off the ground. The child maintains a rhythmic pattern for 4 consecutive gallops. Some common errors that children experience with galloping include a skipping movement performed instead of galloping, and having straight arms through the movement. Some corrections and verbal cues to address these common errors could include place a sticker on the child's lead foot to indicate that this foot must always be in front of the trailing foot, and instructing children to bend their arms. Providing a rhythm for the children to gallop to by clapping can also help. Sliding is like a gallop, but to the side instead of forwards. The body is turned sideways so that the shoulders remain aligned with a line on the ground. The child takes a step sideways with the lead foot, followed by a slide with the trailing foot where both feet come off the ground briefly. The child can complete 4 continuous slides to the preferred side and 4 continuous slides to the non-preferred side. With children in the 3 years age group, you may find the trailing leg maintaining contact with the ground and being dragged to the lead leg, rather than being airborne, as this may be too difficult. The airborne movement can be developed with practice and encouragement, such as instructing the child to use light springing steps, rather than dragging their foot. Some common errors that children experience with sliding include allowing feet to cross during the movement, and the child's body turning so that the hips and shoulders no longer face forwards. Some corrections and verbal cues to address these common errors could include encourage correct movement of the feet by directing children to step, slide, and encourage children to face forward and slide to the side, following the line on the ground. Leaping is a graceful long step where the body lifts off the ground to cover a distance or go over a low obstacle. A short run before a leap aids the momentum of the leap. The child takes off on one foot and lands on the opposite foot. There is a period where both feet are off the ground longer than running. While in the air, there is a forward reach with the arm opposite the lead foot. Some common errors that children experience with leaping include the arm opposite the lead leg does not reach forward during flight. Taking off and landing on the same foot, that is, the child hops instead of leaps. Some corrections and verbal cues to address these common errors could include instructing children to reach forward with their arm opposite the lead foot. Practice by walking this way first before moving to leaping. And encourage children to take off on one foot and land on the opposite foot. This could be done by focusing only on taking off and landing on the preferred foot, before progressing to taking off and landing on the non-preferred foot. Hopping involves standing on one foot and lifting off the ground by leaning slightly on the hopping foot side. The arms are moved forwards and backwards for momentum and balance. Start with balancing on one leg and bending the non-hopping leg. The non-hopping leg swings forward in a pendular fashion to produce force. The foot of the non-hopping leg remains behind the hopping leg so that it does not cross in front of the hopping leg. The arms are bent and swing forward to produce force. The child hops 4 consecutive times on the preferred foot before stopping. Some common errors that children experience with hopping include a lack of pendulum motion in the arms and/or leg, which limits momentum and balance. Non-hopping leg remains in front of the hopping leg, and having straight arms through the movement. Some corrections and verbal cues to address these common errors could include instructing children to swing their arms and non-hopping leg. Suspend a scarf from the child's non-hopping foot to assist the child visually with keeping it behind the hopping leg, and to make sure the child bends their arms. Skipping is a rhythmical forward movement involving a step hop on one leg, and then transferring weight to the other foot to repeat the pattern. Take a step forward followed by a hop on the same foot, followed by a step hop on the other foot. The arms are bent and move in opposition to the legs to produce force. The child completes 4 continuous rhythmical alternating skips. Some common errors that children experience with skipping include an inability to perform the step-hop movement on both legs alternately, landing flat-footed or heel first, and having restricted arm movement to rhythmically support the legs. Some corrections and verbal cues to address these common errors could include instructing children to step, hop, and providing a rhythm for children to move to. Make sure children take off and land on the front of their foot, and encourage children to swing their arms in opposition to their legs. The two-handed catch is a manipulative skill that involves receiving an object. The hands are positioned in front of the body with the elbows bent. The arms extend, reaching for the ball as it arrives. The ball is caught by the hands only. Some common errors that children experience with catching include catching against the body rather than in the hands, turning their head away, closing their eyes, or leaning backwards away from the object, having little or no elbow bend to cushion the ball after catching, and not having their hands ready to catch. Some corrections and verbal cues to address these common errors could include instructing children to have their arms ready and to catch with their hands. Watch the object move into their hands. Bend their elbows so it is easier to hold on to the ball. And to cup their hands together ready for the ball to arrive. Underarm throwing is a manipulative skill that involves applying a pushing force to an object to propel it. The preferred hand swings down and back, reaching behind the trunk. The child steps forward with the foot opposite the throwing hand. The ball is tossed forward, hitting the target without a bounce, and the hand follows through after ball release to at least chest level. Some common errors that children experience with underarm throwing include a lack of step of the foot opposite the throwing hand, lack of arm swing, resulting in the child dropping rather than throwing the ball, and ball release too early or late, making it misdirected. Some corrections and verbal cues to address these common errors could include instructing children to step forward as their arm starts swinging, big, gentle swing with the throwing arm, and encouraging children to release the ball just as their throwing hand passes in front of the body. Overarm throwing is a manipulative skill that requires applying a pushing force to an object to propel it. Wind-up is initiated with a downward movement of the throwing hand and arm. The child rotates their hips and shoulders to a point where the non-throwing side faces the target. They then step with the foot opposite the throwing hand toward the target. The throwing hand follows through after the ball release across the body toward the hip of the non-throwing side. Some common errors that children experience with overarm throwing include a disjointed movement with minimal wind-up, rotation and follow-through, and children taking their eyes off the target. Some corrections and verbal cues to address these common errors could include instructing children to swing their throwing arm down and back as they prepare to throw, then step forward, bring the ball up right next to their ear, push the ball from their hand and bring their arm forward across the body, and to point to the target with their non-throwing hand. Kicking is a manipulative skill that involves applying a pushing force to an object to propel it with the foot. The movement starts with a rapid, continuous approach to the ball. The child takes an elongated stride or leap just prior to ball contact. The non-kicking foot is placed close to the ball. The child kicks the ball with the shoelace area or the inside of the preferred foot, not the toes. Some common errors that children experience with kicking include ball contact being made with the toes, and poking or pushing at the ball rather than running up and kicking through it. Some corrections and verbal cues to address these common errors could include instructing children to kick with the inside of their foot or the shoelace area, and encourage children to run up prior to the kick and then follow through with the leg after contact. For younger children, have the children place their foot beside the ball before they kick and just step forward rather than run up. Stationary dribbling is a manipulative skill that involves applying a pushing force to an object and immediately receiving and pushing it again. The child contacts the ball with one hand at about waist level. They push the ball with their fingertips, not the palm of the hand. The child maintains control of the ball for at least 4 consecutive bounces without moving their feet to retrieve the ball. A common error that children experience with stationary dribbling is slapping the ball with an open palm. A correction and verbal cue to address this common error could include instructing children to use their fingers rather than their palm. Instructing children to use spider fingers will encourage use of the fingertips. Striking a stationary ball is a manipulative skill that involves applying a pushing force with a bat to propel an object into the air. The child's preferred hand grips the bat above the non-preferred hand. The non-preferred hip and shoulder faces straight ahead. The hip and shoulder rotate and de-rotate during swing. The child steps with the non-preferred foot, then hits the ball, sending it straight ahead. Some common errors that children experience with striking a stationary ball include a lack of step and lack of rotation of the hips and shoulders, the bat pointing towards the target area during follow-through, rather than wrapping around the body, and the child taking their eyes off the ball or missing the ball when attempting to hit it. Some corrections and verbal cues to address these common errors could include instructing children to swing their body and step forward, swing the bat, hit and follow through, and encouraging children to keep their eyes on the ball or use a larger ball for a bigger target. As children master the striking of a stationary ball, they can practice striking a self-bounced ball. Space needs to be provided both indoors and outdoors so that children can move safely and develop their fundamental movement skills. Time also needs to be scheduled to incorporate fundamental movement skills into structured and unstructured play. Fundamental movement skills should be demonstrated, practiced, and embedded into everyday activities, such as transition times, music and movement, active playtime, risky play, as well as intentional fundamental movement skill learning experiences. Fundamental movement skills are essential for children's participation in sport and physical activity throughout life. This section will provide some examples of group games and activities that incorporate fundamental movement skills and enable children to practice and develop their fundamental movement skills. When practicing fundamental movement skills, educators should demonstrate the skill to the children and then teach each component of the skill. The skill can then be incorporated into a game or active play. Games and activities in this section are taken from Munch and Move program resources. Other games and activities are also available in the Munch and Move resource manual. Ask the children to tuck scarves or braids into their waistbands, creating a tail. Children can then run around an area and try to steal the scarves off the other children. If they steal a scarf, they need to place it in a bag or box in the middle of the area. If their scarf is stolen, they can get another scarf from the bag or box and continue playing. On a soft fall grassed or carpeted area, mark a start line for children to stand on. Use chalk, masking tape, hoops or flat non-slip markers to mark 4 lily pads stretching out in a straight line from the start line. Place a marker 5 to 10 metres from the last lily pad to mark the finish line. You can set up multiple lines of lily pads depending on the number of children playing. Children can then jump like frogs onto each lily pad. Once they reach the final lily pad, they run to the finish line and then back to the start line. In an appropriate space, set out markers in a circle shape. Pair up the children. One child will be the galloping horse. Put paper streamers around their waist for the reins. The other child will be the rider who holds onto the reins and gallops behind the horse. Remember to swap roles so children get a turn at being both the horse and rider. Ask the children to gallop around the outside of the circle, weaving in and out around the markers. Provide a rhythm for the children to gallop to by clapping. Mark out a relay track and separate children into teams. Children will be running a relay, but instead of running, they will be sliding like crabs. The first child slides up and back and has to high-five the next child in line. Each child does the same until the whole team has finished. Place children into teams. Place some small, soft objects where the children will be running, which will act as hurdles. Children need to run up and back, leaping over the hurdles as they go, and tag the next person in line. In an appropriate space, lay out some small, soft animal toys in a row. Demonstrate the activity. Walk or run up and then hop over the animals, maintaining the hop through the length of the course. Ask the children to hop through the course using big arm movements. Encourage them to try it using their non-preferred foot as well. Give lots of positive encouragement and reinforcement. One child is the traffic controller. The other children line up along a line with the traffic controller facing them 10 to 20 metres away. When the traffic controller says green light, the children skip forward. When the traffic controller says red light, the children have to stop. Once the children reach the traffic controller, ask another child to be the traffic controller, and the other children can skip back in the other direction. In an appropriate space, mark out an area large enough for the children to stand in a circle with the educator in the middle. The educator bounces the ball to each child in the circle. The child catches the ball and bounces it back to the educator. The children who are not catching clap on the bounce and reach high on the catch. Swap the large bouncy ball to a medium-sized ball. Throw the ball to each child in the circle. Sing the following song to the tune of Ferrajaka. I am catching, yes I am. See me catch the ball, clever I am. Draw targets on an outside wall or stick targets on an inside wall. Targets can be drawn with chalk, made out of cardboard, or can be pictures printed on paper. Get the children to line up 2 to 3 metres from the wall and throw beanbags at the target, one at a time. Set up 2 lines using cones or ropes approximately 5 metres apart. Split the children into 2 teams and have them stand behind the lines facing each other. Use beanbags or scrunched up newspaper as balls. The aim of the game is for the children to overarm throw the balls, or beanbags, over the other team's line. The team who has the least balls or beanbags on their side when the educator says stop is the winner. Use skittles or milk bottles as targets and line these up 3 to 5 metres away. Get the children to take turns at kicking a ball and try to knock the skittles over. Mark a line 1 metre or 2 from a hoop, bucket or box. Ask the children to stand in a line behind the line and take turns to bounce a ball. After the child makes 4 bounces, ask them to shoot the ball toward the hoop, bucket or box. Adjust the distance between the line and the hoop, bucket or box according to the skill level of the children. Remember to concentrate on having fun, not making it a contest. Place a ball or scrunched up newspaper into the end of an old stocking. Hang it from an overhead structure like a tree branch, veranda or roof. Children can use a pool noodle, bat or rolled up newspaper to practice striking. These are just examples of some of the many games that incorporate fundamental movement skills, and numerous other favourite children's games can also be used to develop these fundamental movement skills. For example, Bull Rush, Duck, Duck, Goose and What's the Time, Mr. Wolf can be played introducing other locomotor skills such as hopping or galloping. Consider ways to embed fundamental movement skills throughout the day. For example, during transition times, music and movement, active playtime, as well as intentional fundamental movement skill learning experiences. Educators should also have plans for ways to implement fundamental movement skill experiences in both the indoor and outdoor environments, especially to cater for wet or hot weather. Remember, embedding fundamental movement skills into your early childhood education and care service will assist in meeting the requirements of the National Quality Framework. In particular, National Quality Standard 2.2. Healthy eating and physical activity are embedded in the program for children. And the Early Years Learning Framework Learning Outcome 3, children have a strong sense of well-being.